My name is Wayne, and I am 62 years old. I retired from my contracting business in Denver, Colorado, after working my fingers to the bone for 4 decades. When my daughter Jessica turned 35, I gifted her a beautiful house, something I had dreamed of doing since her mother passed. But then her husband Marcus moved his entire family in without asking. I never imagined my generosity would lead to such betrayal. Before I tell you how one simple phrase made these unwanted guests pack their bags overnight, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you have ever felt taken advantage of by your own family. I came from nothing. My parents were hardworking, but we always struggled financially. From the age of 16, I worked construction jobs after school, learning the trade that would eventually become my livelihood. By 22, I had started my own small contracting business, working 60-plus hours weekly, taking any job that would pay the bills. When I was 25, I met Caroline at a friend's barbecue. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. We married within a year, and Jessica came along just after our first anniversary. Caroline was my rock, my everything, and we built a good, solid life together. Our Jessica was the perfect blend of us both. She had her mother's beauty and my stubborn determination. We were not wealthy by any means, but we made sure Jessica never went without. I worked longer hours so Caroline could be home with her after school. We saved pennies for her college fund, took modest vacations to national parks instead of fancy resorts, and taught her the value of hard work. Then when Jessica was 16, Caroline complained of feeling tired all the time. What we thought was just exhaustion from her job as a school administrator turned out to be stage 4 ovarian cancer. Within 6 months, my Caroline was gone. I still remember the funeral like it was yesterday. Jessica standing beside me, her hand clutching mine so tight, I thought she might break my fingers. The rain falling steadily, as if the heavens themselves were grieving. That night, Jessica crawled into our bed and cried until she fell asleep. I sat in the chair across the room watching over her, wondering how on earth I was going to raise a teenage daughter alone. Those years were the hardest of my life. Jessica went through a rebellious phase, as many teenagers do, but it was amplified by her grief. There were slammed doors, screaming matches, and nights I sat up waiting for her to come home. But underneath it all, we were all each other had, and that bond kept us from completely falling apart. Despite our struggles, Jessica excelled academically. She threw herself into her studies with a fierce dedication that reminded me so much of her mother. When the acceptance letter from Colorado State came with a partial scholarship, I think I cried more than she did. I was so damn proud of her. During her college years, our relationship healed and strengthened. She would call me twice a week without fail, and I drove up to Fort Collins once a month with homemade meals and to help her with laundry. She studied marketing and graduated with honors. I sat in the audience at her graduation ceremony, knowing Caroline would have been bursting with pride. After college, Jessica moved back to Denver and secured a position at a marketing agency. She was building a good career for herself, and we settled into a comfortable routine of Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. She dated occasionally, but no one serious, until Marcus. She met him at work. He had joined the agency as a new account manager transferred from their Chicago office. Jessica talked about him constantly before I even met him. Marcus said this, Marcus thinks that. When she finally brought him to Sunday dinner, I could see why she was smitten. He was tall, well-dressed, and had an easy confidence about him. He complimented my pot roast and asked thoughtful questions about my construction business. I liked him immediately. Their romance progressed quickly. Within 6 months, they were engaged. I will admit I thought it was too fast. I suggested they might want to date longer, But Jessica assured me they were certain. Marcus had swept her off her feet with romantic gestures and promises of a beautiful future together. Who was I to stand in the way of her happiness? I gave them my blessing and helped plan the wedding. It was a modest affair at a local event space. I paid for everything despite Marcus assuring me his family would contribute. Somehow their contribution never materialized, but I did not mind. Seeing Jessica walk down the aisle in her mother's restored wedding dress was worth every penny. I danced with my daughter as we both thought of Caroline, and I felt a sense of completion, like I had fulfilled my duty as a father. After the wedding, things began to change. The Sunday dinners became less frequent. Jessica always had a reason. They were busy with work. They had plans with friends. They were just too tired. I understood that newlyweds needed their space, so I did not push. But weeks turned into months, and I saw my daughter less and less. When we did get together, Marcus was often absent, citing work commitments. Jessica seemed different too, more subdued, less likely to share details of her life. When I asked about their plans for the future, she would give vague answers and quickly change the subject. I retired at 60, selling my construction business to my foreman for a substantial sum. After decades of physical labor, my body was telling me it was time to slow down. My doctor also informed me I had developed a mild heart condition that needed monitoring. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but enough to make me take stock of my life and what really mattered. Around this time, during one of our increasingly rare visits, Jessica mentioned they were struggling to save for a house. The market in Denver had exploded, and even with their combined incomes, a down payment seemed out of reach. Marcus had student loans, and they were paying high rent for a downtown apartment. I remember sitting in my modest two-bedroom apartment that evening, looking at my bank statements. The sale of my business had left me comfortable but not wealthy. I had always been careful with money, saving diligently for retirement. But what good was money sitting in an account when my only child was struggling? What was I saving it for, if not for her? The next day, I called Jessica and asked her to meet me for coffee, just the two of us. She seemed surprised but agreed. When I told her I wanted to buy them a house, her eyes filled with tears. "Dad, we cannot accept that," she said, but I could see the hope in her eyes. "Consider it an early inheritance," I told her. "I would rather see you enjoy it while I am alive than have you get it when I am gone." She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. It was the closest I had felt to her since before her wedding. In that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. We started house hunting the following weekend. Marcus was always too busy to join us, which struck me as odd, but Jessica explained he trusted her judgment completely. We looked at dozens of houses. Some were too small, others needed too much work, and many were simply out of even my budget. Denver real estate had become a monster. Then we found it. A beautiful 4-bedroom Craftsman in a good school district. It needed some cosmetic updates but was structurally sound. The moment Jessica walked in, I could tell she had fallen in love with it. The way she ran her hand along the banister, how she stood in the kitchen, imagining where everything would go. It reminded me of Caroline when we bought our first house. I made an offer that day, and after some negotiation, it was accepted. I signed over nearly 2/3 of my retirement savings without hesitation. The look on Jessica's face made it worth every penny. While waiting for closing, I took some time to do minor renovations. I replaced the dated kitchen countertops, refinished the hardwood floors, and built custom shelving in what would become their home office. It felt good to work with my hands again, to pour my love for my daughter into physical improvements to her future home. On Jessica's 35th birthday, I handed her the keys along with a photo album documenting the renovation process. She cried and promised I could visit any time. This would be our family home, she said, where future grandchildren would come to know their grandfather. Marcus shook my hand firmly and thanked me profusely. I believed I had not only given them a home, but had also strengthened our family bonds. I moved into a smaller apartment, adjusting to a more modest lifestyle after the significant financial outlay. The deed was in Jessica's name, but I kept careful documentation of the gift at the advice of my longtime friend and attorney, Thomas. Not because I did not trust Jessica, but because it was the prudent thing to do. Thomas had insisted on this, saying, "You never know what the future might hold." How right he would turn out to be. My first few visits to Jessica and Marcus's new home were wonderful. Jessica would cook dinner, a skill she had been honing, and we would sit around the dining table I had refinished, talking and laughing. Marcus seemed genuinely grateful, often mentioning how much easier their lives were without the burden of a mortgage. They were settling in nicely, and I felt a deep satisfaction knowing I had helped make this possible. After about a month, I began noticing small changes each time I visited. The guest room I had painted a soft blue for potential grandchildren was now filled with exercise equipment. The bookshelves I had built in the living room, which had been filled with Jessica's beloved book collection, now displayed numerous photos of people I did not recognize. "Who are all these people?" I asked Jessica during one visit. "Oh, those are Marcus's family photos," she explained with a slightly forced smile. "He wanted to make the place feel more like home." I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. It seemed strange that Marcus needed so many photos of his family in a home that was meant to be the start of his and Jessica's own family traditions. But I kept my thoughts to myself. It was their house now, after all. As weeks passed, Jessica began making excuses to postpone my visits. She was working late. Marcus had colleagues over. They were redecorating and the house was a mess. Each excuse seemed reasonable enough on its own, but the pattern was becoming clear. I was being gradually pushed out of their lives. Then came Thanksgiving. Jessica had always spent the holiday with me since Carolyn passed, but this year she called to invite me to their house instead. "Marcus wants to host this year," she explained. "His parents will be here too. You will finally get to meet them." I arrived at their house on Thanksgiving Day with a bottle of good scotch and Caroline's recipe for cranberry sauce that Jessica had always loved. I was nervous about meeting Marcus's parents, but excited to expand our small family circle. When Jessica opened the door, the house was filled with noise and people. Not just Marcus's parents as I had expected, but what appeared to be a small crowd. Jessica looked stressed, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she took my coat. "Dad, come meet everyone," she said, leading me into the living room. Marcus was in the middle of a loud conversation with an older man who looked remarkably like him. His father, I presumed. There was an older woman arranging flowers on the coffee table, a younger man playing video games on the television I had gifted them, and a young woman cuddled up on the couch with a man I did not recognize. "Everyone, this is my dad, Wayne," Jessica announced. Marcus's father stood and shook my hand. "So you are the generous father-in-law we have heard about. I am Robert. This is my wife, Susan. That is our son Bradley on the games, and our daughter Alicia with her boyfriend Pete." I blinked in surprise. "It is nice to meet you all. I did not realize the whole family would be here." Marcus laughed, a sound that somehow it seemed less warm than I remembered. "Did not Jessica tell you Mom and Dad moved in with us last month? They sold their house in Chicago." I looked at Jessica, who was suddenly very interested in straightening the table runner. "No, she did not mention that." "It is just temporary," Susan said, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. "Until we find the right place here in Denver." I nodded, maintaining my composure despite the shock. The house I had bought for my daughter and her husband was now apparently home to his entire family. Throughout dinner, I learned that Robert had taken early retirement, and they had decided to relocate to be closer to Marcus. The fact that they now had a spacious mortgage-free place to stay seemed to be a very convenient factor in this decision. I kept my concerns to myself that day. I did not want to create tension during a holiday meal. But as I drove home that night, I could not help feeling that something was very wrong with the situation. In the weeks that followed, more revelations came. During a brief phone call, Jessica mentioned that Marcus's brother Bradley had hit a rough patch and would be staying with them just until he finds a new job. A subsequent visit revealed that Alicia and boyfriend Pete had also moved in as they were saving for their own place. The beautiful home I had purchased for my daughter was becoming increasingly crowded and chaotic. My renovation work was being undone or modified without consultation. The workshop I had set up in the basement, where I had hoped to teach future grandchildren woodworking skills as my father had taught me, had been converted into a bedroom for Bradley. Each time I visited, I felt more and more like a stranger. Marcus's family dominated conversations, reminiscing about events I had no part in, making inside jokes I did not understand. Jessica seemed torn, occasionally shooting me apologetic glances, but never speaking up. During one visit, I excused myself to use the bathroom and overheard Bradley talking in the kitchen. "The old man sure set us up nicely," he laughed. "Free house courtesy of Papa Wayne." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Was that how they saw me, just the foolish old man who had provided them with free housing? The Christmas gathering was the worst. I arrived with carefully selected gifts for Jessica and Marcus, only to find myself expected to have brought presents for his entire family as well. The awkward silence when I handed over just 2 packages made my face burn with embarrassment. I sat in a corner for most of the evening, watching as Marcus's family exchanged gifts and stories, their laughter filling the house I had purchased. Jessica brought me a plate of food and sat with me briefly before being called away by Susan to help in the kitchen. I left early, claiming fatigue, and Jessica barely had time to walk me to the door before being pulled back into the celebrations. As I drove home alone on Christmas night, I realized that the home I had sacrificed so much to provide had been completely taken over. And worse, my beloved daughter seemed unable or unwilling to stop it. The stress of the situation began to take its toll on my health. My heart condition, which had been stable, worsened. I found myself waking up at night, chest tight with anxiety, replaying conversations and scenarios in my head. My doctor noticed the change during my checkup and increased my medication, warning me that emotional stress could be as damaging as physical exertion for someone with my condition. "Is everything okay at home, Wayne?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I gave him the short version of the situation with Jessica and Marcus's family. He shook his head sympathetically. "Family issues can be the hardest on the heart, both literally and figuratively. You need to resolve this situation for your health's sake." My neighbor Gloria, a retired school principal with a no-nonsense attitude, became my unexpected confidant. We had always been friendly, exchanging pleasantries when collecting mail or shoveling snow, but never particularly close. That changed when she found me sitting on the steps outside our apartment building one evening, looking more defeated than I cared to admit. "You look like a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders," she said, settling beside me with a groan that spoke of her own aging joints. Something about her direct manner broke through my usual stoicism. I told her everything, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. The house, Jessica's marriage, Marcus's family moving in, my growing alienation from my only child. Gloria listened without interruption, then fixed me with a stern look that probably had intimidated generations of schoolchildren. "Wayne, you need to stand up for yourself. Not just for your sake, but for Jessica's too. If you keep letting people walk all over you, they will never stop." "I do not want to risk my relationship with my daughter," I protested. What relationship? Gloria asked bluntly. From what you have told me, you barely see her anymore, and when you do, you are treated like an unwelcome guest rather than family. That is not a relationship worth preserving, as is. It needs fixing, and sometimes fixing requires breaking things down first. Her words stayed with me for days. I knew she was right, but taking action was terrifying. What if confronting the situation only pushed Jessica further away? Nevertheless, I decided to try having a heart-to-heart with Jessica alone. I called and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, like old times. She agreed, sounding almost relieved. We met at our favorite diner where we had spent countless Saturday mornings after Caroline died. Jessica looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. Her usual vibrant energy diminished. We made small talk for a while, catching up on work and mundane details, dancing around the elephant in the room. Finally, I gathered my courage. Jessica, honey, I need to ask you something. Are you happy with the current living situation at your house? Her eyes immediately welled with tears, confirming my suspicions. But before she could answer, her phone rang. It was Marcus's mother calling about some household emergency that required Jessica's immediate return. Our conversation was cut short with Jessica promising to call me later for a proper talk. That call never came. A few weeks later, Jessica invited me for dinner to celebrate my birthday. I arrived with lowered expectations, prepared for another uncomfortable evening of feeling like an outsider. What I found exceeded even my worst fears. Marcus's mother, Susan, had completely rearranged the living room furniture, including moving the antique side table that had belonged to Carolyn's grandmother and which I had carefully restored for Jessica. When I commented on the change, Susan waved dismissively. That old thing was taking up too much space. We needed room for Bradley's gaming setup. I bit my tongue and tried to focus on enjoying time with Jessica. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took a wrong turn in the hallway, opening what I thought was the bathroom door, but was actually a closet. There, shoved unceremoniously behind winter coats, was the framed photo of Caroline that had once held pride of place in the living room. I carefully extracted it, dust coating the glass. When I returned to the dining room holding the photo, conversation stopped. I found this in the closet, I said quietly. Jessica looked mortified. Dad, I was meaning to clean that and put it back up. Marcus interjected, his tone condescending. We needed the wall space for Mom's family portrait. It is much larger and works better with the new decor. That is a picture of my late wife, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. Jessica's mother. And this is our home now, Marcus replied firmly. We need to make decorating decisions that work for everyone living here. Jessica started to say something, tears in her eyes, but Marcus cut her off with a look. She fell silent, and my heart broke a little more at her submission. The evening deteriorated from there. I tried to maintain my composure, but when I overheard Marcus's family discussing plans to convert the upstairs office, which I had specifically designed with Jessica's work needs in mind, into another bedroom for Alicia's boyfriend's brother, who was going through a rough time, I had to step outside for air. Jessica followed me onto the porch, clearly distressed. Dad, I am sorry. Things have been complicated. How long are they staying, Jessica? I asked directly. She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. They sold their houses, Dad. They do not really have a timeline for moving out. The reality hit me like a physical blow. This was not a temporary arrangement. Marcus's family had permanently moved in, taking advantage of the gift I had given my daughter. And Jessica, my strong, independent daughter, was allowing it to happen. The final straw came when I returned inside to collect my jacket. In the kitchen, I spotted my retirement gift, a hammer with my name and years of service engraved on the handle, a precious token from my construction crew that I had displayed proudly in the workshop before it was converted to Bradley's room. Now it was being used to prop open a door for their dog to access the backyard. I picked it up, running my thumb over the engraving, now scratched and worn from being dragged across the concrete patio. Something inside me snapped at that moment. Not in anger, but in clarity. I had allowed this situation to continue for too long. I left without saying goodbye, the engraved hammer clutched in my hand. Jessica texted later to apologize for the tension, but made no mention of the deeper issues. For the first time in our relationship, I did not respond. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to address this situation without losing my daughter entirely. A week passed with no contact, the longest we had gone without speaking since she left for college. I spent the time reflecting, consulting with my doctor about managing my stress, and most importantly, having several long conversations with my attorney friend, Thomas. Thomas and I had been friends since high school. He went to law school while I built my construction business, but we had remained close through marriages, children, and in his case, divorce. His legal expertise had been invaluable when I set up my business, and now I needed his advice on a more personal matter. We met in his office downtown, the formality of the setting appropriate for the conversation we needed to have. I brought all the documentation related to the house, including the deed transfer paperwork, and even photos from when I gifted it to Jessica. "Wayne, you have put yourself in a difficult position," Thomas said, after reviewing everything. "Legally, the house belongs to Jessica. It was a gift, and gifts do not come with strings attached in the eyes of the law." My heart sank, but Thomas held up a hand. "However, there are some interesting factors here. Your documentation clearly states your intention that this was a gift for Jessica and Marcus's family home. We have written evidence of your specific purpose, including your renovation work designed around their needs as a couple." He tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. "More importantly, I am concerned about potential elder financial abuse." "Elder?" I scoffed. "I am only 62. Thomas smiled slightly. "In legal terms, that qualifies. And the fact is, you gave a substantial financial gift that is not being used as intended, potentially under false pretenses. If Marcus knew his family would be moving in when you purchased the house, that could constitute fraud." I shook my head. "I cannot prove that, and I do not want to accuse my son-in-law of fraud. I just want my daughter to have the life I thought I was helping provide." "Tell me about Marcus's family situation," Thomas prompted. "Why are they all living there?" I shared what little I knew. Robert and Susan had taken early retirement and sold their Chicago home. Bradley had lost his job. Alicia and her boyfriend were supposedly saving for their own place. Thomas made some notes and asked if I minded if he did some research. I gave him permission, not expecting much to come of it. 3 days later, Thomas called and asked me to come back to his office. The information he had uncovered was eye-opening. Robert and Susan sold their Chicago home for nearly $700,000, he informed me. They did not need to move in with Marcus and Jessica. They could easily afford their own place. Bradley has been between jobs for nearly 3 years, according to his LinkedIn profile, and Alicia was evicted from her last 2 apartments for non-payment of rent. I sat back stunned. So they are all just taking advantage? "It appears so," Thomas agreed. "And here is where it gets interesting from a legal standpoint. Your gift was specifically for Jessica and Marcus to start their own family. The current situation could be construed as a misuse of your financial contribution, especially given your health conditions and the financial strain this has placed on you." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, not entirely comfortable with where this was heading. "You have options," Thomas said carefully. We could send a formal letter outlining the original terms of your gift and requesting the situation be remedied. We could potentially seek partial repayment based on the change in circumstances. Or what? Or you could try one more direct conversation armed with this knowledge and a clear boundary. Sometimes the threat of legal action is more effective than actually taking it, especially when family is involved. I considered my options carefully. I did not want to sue my daughter or create irreparable damage to our relationship. But Thomas was right about one thing: I needed to establish clear boundaries, and I needed to do it from a position of knowledge and strength. I spent the next few days preparing myself mentally and emotionally for the confrontation. I gathered my documentation, including Thomas's findings on Marcus's family's financial situations. I wrote out what I wanted to say, then rewrote it several times, striking a balance between firmness and love. Most importantly, I made peace with the possibility that this confrontation might temporarily damage my relationship with Jessica. Sometimes doing the right thing for someone you love means being willing to be the bad guy in their eyes for a while. On Sunday afternoon, I drove to the house without calling first. I knew from experience that scheduled visits were now carefully orchestrated performances with Marcus's family on their best behavior. I needed to see the reality. I knocked on the door of the house I had bought, but feeling like a visitor rather than family. Bradley opened it, looking surprised and not particularly pleased to see me. "Wayne," he said flatly, "we were not expecting you." "I came to see my daughter," I replied, walking past him into the house without waiting for an invitation. The scene inside confirmed everything I had suspected. Robert and Susan were lounging in the living room watching television shows on the coffee table I had built. Alicia, and now two men, her boyfriend Pete and presumably his brother, were playing cards at the dining table. The house was messier than Jessica would ever have allowed when it was just her and Marcus, with takeout containers and beer bottles scattered about. "Dad!" Jessica appeared from the kitchen, clearly flustered by my unexpected appearance. "Is everything okay? You should have called." Marcus followed behind her, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance when he saw me. "Wayne, this is not a good time. We were just about to head out." I smiled politely. "This will not take long. I need to speak with everyone, actually." Jessica looked confused but nodded. "Okay, let me just tell everyone to come into the living room." Soon, all 7 occupants of the house were gathered, looking at me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. I remained standing while they sat, a deliberate choice to maintain the position of authority I needed for what was to come. "Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time," I began calmly. "I wanted to speak with all of you about this house and the current living arrangements." Marcus immediately tried to take control of the conversation. "Wayne, with all due respect, these are family matters that Jessica and I should discuss with you privately." "That would have been my preference as well," I replied evenly. "But since these family matters involve everyone in this room living in a house I purchased, I think everyone should be part of the discussion." An uncomfortable silence fell. Susan exchanged glances with Robert. Bradley suddenly became very interested in his phone. I continued, my voice steady. "When I gifted this house to Jessica and Marcus, it was with a specific purpose in mind. I wanted to provide a home where they could build their life together, perhaps start a family, create their own traditions and memories." I paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. What I did not intend was to provide free housing for Marcus's extended family. I did not renovate this house, including specific customizations for Jessica's needs and preferences, so that it could become a community living experiment. Marcus's face flushed with anger. "The house belongs to us now. It was a gift. We can decide who lives here." I nodded slowly. "Legally, you are correct. The house belongs to Jessica." I emphasized my daughter's name slightly, a reminder that I had put the deed in her name alone. But gifts are given with intent, and my intent has been disregarded and disrespected. Then I delivered the phrase I had carefully prepared, the one I hoped would cut through all the justifications and excuses. This was a gift for my daughter's family, not a community center. You have 30 days to restore its purpose, or I will restore it myself. The room went completely silent. Even Bradley looked up from his phone. Marcus was the first to recover. "Is that some kind of threat?" he demanded. "Not at all," I replied calmly. "It is a boundary, and it comes with information I think everyone should have." I turned to Robert and Susan. "You sold your Chicago home for $700,000. You have the financial means to purchase your own home here in Denver. You do not need to live with your son and daughter-in-law in a house meant for them to start their own family." Their shocked expressions confirmed Thomas's research had been accurate. To Bradley, I said, "You have been between jobs for 3 years now. Perhaps it is time to lower your expectations and take what is available while you look for something in your field. Many people work jobs they do not love to pay their bills. I did construction for 40 years, often in freezing cold or blistering heat to provide for my family." Finally, I addressed Alicia and her boyfriend. "And you two have been evicted from your last 2 apartments. Perhaps the issue is not the cost of housing, but the responsibility of maintaining it." I placed a folder on the coffee table. "These are copies of all the documentation related to the gift of this house, including my explicit intentions. Also included are some lovely photos of how the house looked when I gave it to Jessica, before it was taken over and changed beyond recognition." Marcus stood up, his face contorted with anger. "You have no right to come in here and dictate how we live. You gave up that right when you signed over the deed." I maintained my composure, though my heart was pounding. "You are correct that I cannot legally force anyone to leave, but I can and will pursue other options if necessary. Options that would be public messy and potentially embarrassing for everyone involved." I turned to Jessica, whose face had gone pale. "I never wanted it to come to this. You know that. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy to have the kind of home your mother and I tried to provide for you. A real home, not a boarding house for people who should be responsible for themselves." Without waiting for responses or arguments, I turned and walked toward the door. I had said what I needed to say, established the boundary that needed to be set. Anything more would just lead to heated exchanges that would solve nothing. As I reached the door, I heard Jessica call my name, her voice breaking. I paused, but did not turn around. 30 days, I repeated quietly, and left. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anxiety about the confrontation and its potential fallout, sadness that it had come to this. But underneath it all was a sense of relief and even pride. For the first time in too long, I had stood up for myself, for what was right, for the original intent of my gift to my daughter. Whether or not it worked, I had reclaimed a piece of my dignity. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. My phone remained silent, no calls or texts from Jessica. I worried I had pushed too hard, said too much, that my relationship with my only child was irreparably damaged. I busied myself with small projects around my apartment, trying not to check my phone every 5 minutes. Gloria stopped by with homemade bread and a sympathetic ear. I told her what had happened, and she nodded approvingly. "You did the right thing, Wayne. Now you wait. Ball is in their court." On the 4th day, as I was returning from a doctor's appointment, I found Jessica sitting on the steps outside my apartment building. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. My heart lurched at the sight, and I fought the immediate urge to apologize, to take back everything I had said, just to see her smile again. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. Inside my apartment, I made us both tea the way Caroline used to, when difficult conversations were needed. Jessica sat at my small kitchen table, turning the mug in her hands without drinking. "I am sorry," she began, tears welling in her eyes again. "I am so, so sorry, Dad." "For what exactly?" I asked gently. I needed to hear her articulate it. For letting things get so out of control. For not standing up to Marcus and his family. For letting them take over the house you gave us. For not appreciating what you did for us. The words came in a rush, like she had been holding them back for too long. I reached across the table and took her hand. "Why did you let it happen, Jessica? That is not the strong woman I raised." She wiped her eyes with her free hand. "It happened so gradually. First, it was just his parents needing a place to stay while they looked for a house. Then Bradley needed help. Then Alicia. Each time Marcus assured me it was temporary. Each time I believed him because I wanted to. Because saying no would have meant fights and tension. And Marcus encouraged all this." Jessica nodded miserably. "He and his family have always been enmeshed. They do not have boundaries like you and I do. They share everything, make decisions as a group. I thought it was nice at first how close they were. I did not realize what," I prompted when she trailed off. "That they were using us. Using me." She met my eyes directly for the first time. "Using you." I squeezed her hand, encouraging her to continue. "After you left on Sunday, everything exploded. Marcus was furious with you, but his family was furious with him. Turns out he had told them the house was an investment we all made together, that you had given us money, but we had contributed too. They had no idea you paid for everything." My eyebrows shot up in surprise. "He lied to them about where the house came from." "Yes, and to me about their situations. His parents did sell their house for a lot of money, but Marcus had convinced me they needed to save it all for retirement. Bradley does have job offers, but Marcus keeps telling him to hold out for something better. And Alicia," she shook her head in disgust. "Alicia has never paid rent anywhere. Her parents or Marcus have always covered for her." The pieces were falling into place. Marcus had deliberately manipulated everyone, creating a situation where his entire family could benefit from my generosity, while keeping everyone in the dark about the true circumstances. "They started packing that night, Dad. As soon as you left. Robert and Susan were mortified when they realized the truth. They had no idea you had paid for the entire house. They are closing on a condo next week. Apparently they have been looking for months, but Marcus kept discouraging them from buying, saying the market was going to crash." I sat back processing this information. "And what about Marcus? How does he feel about all this?" Jessica's expression hardened slightly. "We have been having a lot of difficult conversations. I told him either his family moves out or I do. I meant it, Dad. For the first time since we got married, I stood my ground completely." Pride swelled in my chest, tempered with concern. That could not have been easy. "It was not," she admitted. "There was a lot of yelling, a lot of accusations. But when I threatened to leave, something changed. It was like he finally realized what he stood to lose. He has been calling complexes to find Bradley an apartment. He even offered to help with the deposit." "And you?" I asked carefully. "Where do you stand in all this? Are you and Marcus going to be okay?" Jessica sighed, the weight of the situation evident in the slump of her shoulders. "I do not know. I love him, but I have seen a side of him through all this that disturbs me. The manipulation, the entitlement, the way he dismissed your feelings after everything you did for us. We are going to try counseling." "That sounds like a wise decision." I said, relieved she was not rushing to either extreme, neither dismissing the serious issues, nor giving up without trying to address them. Can you forgive me, Dad, for letting this happen, for not seeing what was happening sooner? Her voice broke again. I moved around the table and pulled my daughter into a hug, the way I had when she was small and hurting. There is nothing to forgive. We all make mistakes, especially when it comes to the people we love. The important thing is that you are fixing it now. She hugged me back fiercely. I want you to come see the house next week. They will all be gone by then, and Marcus and I are going to restore it to how you designed it. Well, mostly. I actually like some of the changes. I laughed, relieved to see a glimpse of my daughter's spirit returning. It is your house, Jessica. Make it how you want it. Just maybe run the major changes by me first. Deal, she said, smiling through her tears. As promised, I visited the house the following week. The transformation was remarkable. Robert and Susan had moved to their new condo. Bradley had found an apartment, and according to Jessica, an entry-level job in his field. Alicia and her boyfriend had moved in with friends with Marcus, providing a strict timeline for their departure. The house was noticeably quieter, cleaner, and felt more like the home I had envisioned for my daughter. Many of my original touches had been restored, including Caroline's photo back in its place of honor in the living room. Marcus was present for my visit, subdued and clearly uncomfortable. He offered a stiff apology, which I accepted with equal formality. It would take time to rebuild trust between us, if that was even possible. But for Jessica's sake, I was willing to try. Jessica showed me around, proudly pointing out the changes they were making together. The most significant was in the former workshop, which they were converting into a proper guest room, so you can stay over whenever you want, Dad. Over dinner, Marcus surprised me by asking for advice about some minor repairs needed around the house. It was clearly an olive branch, an acknowledgement of my expertise, and perhaps a small step toward reestablishing a respectful relationship. I accepted it as such offering to help with the more complex tasks. As the weeks passed, Jessica and I fell back into our regular pattern of Sunday dinners, though now they were at my apartment, as often as at their house. She kept me updated on their progress with counseling, which seemed to be having a positive effect. Marcus was learning about boundaries and appropriate family relationships. Jessica was learning to assert herself more effectively. I began teaching Jessica basic home maintenance skills during my visits, something I had always meant to do but never got around to. Together we fixed leaky faucets, patched drywall holes left by Bradley's careless furniture, moving and repainted rooms to cover the evidence of the house's brief tenure as a family compound. These projects gave us time to talk to rebuild our own relationship that had been strained by the situation. You know what the counselor said was the turning point for us? Jessica asked one Saturday as we installed a ceiling fan in the master bedroom. What is that? I asked, holding the mounting bracket steady while she connected the wires. Your phrase. This was a gift for my daughter's family, not a community center. She said it was perfect because it clearly defined the boundary without attacking anyone personally. Marcus admitted it hit him like a ton of bricks because he could not argue with it. I smiled, remembering how carefully I had crafted those words. Sometimes the right phrase at the right time can change everything. And 6 months after my confrontation with Marcus's family, Jessica invited me over for a special dinner. When I arrived, I was pleased to find just the three of us, Marcus, Jessica, and myself. The house had fully transformed back into the home I had envisioned, with personal touches that reflected Jessica and Marcus as a couple rather than Marcus's extended family. Our weekly family dinners had become a cherished routine, rotating between my apartment and their house. Marcus, though still occasionally stiff around me, had made noticeable efforts to rebuild our relationship. He asked for my advice on home repairs, listened to my stories about Jessica's childhood, and most importantly, respected the boundaries that had been established. "Dad, we have something to show you," Jessica said after dinner, her eyes bright with excitement. She led me upstairs to what had once been my workshop, then Bradley's bedroom, then the guest room. The door was closed and Jessica gestured for me to open it. Inside, I found a room transformed once again, but this time into something that brought tears to my eyes. It was a nursery painted a soft yellow, with a beautiful crib I recognized as the one I had built for Jessica when she was born, retrieved from my storage unit and refinished. "Are you—" I could not finish the sentence, emotion overwhelming me. Jessica nodded, her hand moving to rest on her stomach, which I now noticed showed the slightest curve. 12 weeks along. We wanted to wait until we were past the first trimester to tell you. I embraced my daughter, then, after a moment's hesitation, Marcus as well. He returned the hug with surprising warmth. "Congratulations to you both," I said, wiping my eyes unashamedly. "This is wonderful news." "We want you to be involved every step of the way," Jessica said. "This baby is going to need their grandfather's wisdom." Marcus nodded agreement. "And maybe you could help me build some shelves for the nursery. I am not much with tools, but I would like to learn." This simple request spoke volumes about the change in our relationship. It was an acknowledgement of my skills, a desire to learn from me, and a way of including me in preparations for my grandchild's arrival. "I would be honored," I told him sincerely. Later, as we sat in the living room discussing names and due dates, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From the joy of gifting the house through the pain of feeling pushed out to the confrontation that had seemed so risky at the time to this moment of genuine family connection. I thought of Caroline and how proud she would be of Jessica for finding her strength. I pictured her smile at the news of a grandchild, how she would have already been knitting blankets and booties. The ache of missing her would never fully disappear, but it was softer now, gentler, accompanied by gratitude for the years we had together and the amazing daughter we had raised. As for Marcus, his transformation had surprised me the most. Without his family's constant influence, he had become more thoughtful, more considerate. The counseling he and Jessica had committed to was clearly making a difference. While I might never fully trust him the way I once had, I could respect the effort he was making to be a better husband and soon a father. Jessica later told me that after his family left, Marcus had gone through a period of resentment and blame, but the potential loss of his marriage had been a powerful wake-up call. Their counselor had helped him see how his enmeshed family dynamics had created unhealthy patterns that he was unconsciously repeating. It would be an ongoing process, but I was cautiously optimistic about their future together. Marcus's family now visited occasionally, but always as proper guests. Robert and Susan seemed genuinely remorseful about their role in the situation, bringing thoughtful gifts and never overstaying their welcome. Bradley and Alicia maintained their distance, perhaps embarrassed by how things had played out. My own life had expanded in unexpected ways as well. Gloria and I had moved beyond neighbors and friends to something more. At our age, we were taking things slowly, enjoying dinner dates and long conversations without the pressure of defining our relationship. She had been my rock through the difficult times with Jessica, and now she shared in my joy at becoming a grandfather. My health had improved significantly with the reduction in stress. My doctor was pleased with my latest tests, joking that family drama was more dangerous than physical labor for heart patients. "You look happy, Dad," Jessica said, interrupting my thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" "Just reflecting on how much can change in a year," I replied, "and how sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary ones." She nodded, understanding. "I think about that a lot. If you had not confronted us that day, who knows where we would all be now. It took a lot of courage." Love does not mean becoming a doormat. I told her, sharing the wisdom I had gained at considerable cost. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is draw a clear line. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, I paused in the entryway, where a new family photo hung, just Jessica and Marcus looking happy and hopeful. Next to it was the space where a picture of the three of us with the new baby would someday hang. The house had finally become the family home I had envisioned when I first decided to make this gift. In the end, it had taken just one carefully chosen phrase to set everything right. Not through force or threats, but through clear boundaries spoken from a place of love and truth. And perhaps that is the most valuable lesson in all of this, to pass down to my grandchild. Someday, the power of standing firm for what is right, even when it is difficult, especially when it is difficult. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more tales from my journey. Remember, sometimes the most profound changes in our relationships begin with a single phrase spoken from the heart. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to speak your truth when needed.